From the outside, Isabella's life seemed like a dream. She was the wife of Alexander, a man who had built a fortune large enough to buy anything he desired. Yachts that gleamed under the sun, penthouses with glass walls that overlooked the city, and parties that gathered the most powerful names in society. Cameras flashed whenever they appeared together, and their photographs were plastered in magazines that labeled them as a golden couple. Isabella, with her gentle smile and glowing skin, carried herself with a grace that made people believe she had everything a woman could wish for. What they did not see was the loneliness in her eyes when the lights dimmed and the crowd dispersed. Isabella, pregnant with their first child, nurtured dreams of building a home filled with laughter and warmth. She decorated the nursery herself, carefully selecting every shade and every piece of furniture, her heart swelling with the thought of rocking her baby to sleep. Her love for Alexander was deep and unwavering, as if she believed her devotion alone could keep the cracks in their marriage from widening. She forgave the small slights, ignored the dismissive tones, and hoped that once their child arrived, his heart would soften, and he would learn to love not just her but the family they were creating together. Alexander, however, was a man intoxicated by power. His wealth had made him arrogant, his charm sharpened into a weapon he used to manipulate and impress. To the public, he played the role of a devoted husband, kissing Isabella's hand at charity galas and speaking fondly of the family they were expecting. In private, he grew restless, irritated by her tenderness, and blind to her sacrifices. He saw her not as a partner but as an accessory that enhanced his image of success. Beneath the glittering surface, his cruelty was subtle but constant, cutting words, cold silences, and an indifference that pierced deeper than any visible wound. Isabella's father remained a distant figure in their lives. A man of immense power and influence, he had built his own empire through brilliance and unshakable will. Though he loved his daughter dearly, he had always believed in allowing her independence, stepping back to let her carve her own path. But deep within, he carried a fierce protectiveness, one that would awaken when he saw the pain Alexander inflicted. For now, his presence was only a shadow, but the storm he would bring was inevitable, waiting for the moment his daughter's tears would reach him. Isabella's world revolved around the quiet corners of her home, where she tried to build a life filled with tenderness and anticipation. Each morning she would wake with her hands resting gently on her growing belly, whispering words of comfort and love to the little life moving within her. She imagined the sound of soft giggles echoing in the halls, the smell of freshly baked cookies filling the kitchen, and the warmth of evenings spent as a family. These dreams painted her heart with hope, giving her strength even on the days when Alexander's absence left her hollow. She had taken it upon herself to create a sanctuary for the child. The nursery became her favorite room, a haven painted in soft shades of cream and lavender. Tiny clothes hung neatly in the closet, each folded with care. Sometimes she would sit in the rocking chair for hours, swaying gently, her hand tracing circles across her stomach as she hummed lullabies. In those moments, she felt less alone, as though the baby inside her already understood her love and responded with little kicks of reassurance. But her joy was never complete. The one piece missing was Alexander's presence. She longed for him to join her in those tender rituals, to feel the baby kick, to smile at the nursery's progress, to share the small wonders of their unborn child. Instead, he remained distant, often leaving early in the morning and returning long after midnight. When he was home, his focus was on his phone, his work, or his own reflection in the mirror. Isabella tried to bridge the silence, but his replies were curt, his affection mechanical. The contrast between her soft devotion and his cold detachment was sharp enough to wound. She gave him her whole heart, yet received fragments in return. Each ignored smile and unanswered question etched a deeper ache into her soul. Still, she held on to hope, convincing herself that fatherhood might awaken the love she knew must exist within him somewhere. Until then, she poured all her affection into the child growing inside her, the one being who she knew would never turn away from her love. While Isabella poured her heart into building a world of tenderness, Alexander was busy crafting one of deception and indulgence. Behind the walls of glittering respectability, he lived a double life, one that thrived on secrecy and temptation. His calendar was filled not only with boardroom meetings and high-stake negotiations, but also with stolen hours reserved for a woman who was not his wife. Late nights at work, were often lavish dinners in candlelit restaurants where Isabella's name was never spoken. Instead, laughter and whispered promises were shared with his mistress, a woman who fed his ego as much as she fueled his desires. The mistress was striking, her beauty sharp, almost predatory, designed to catch the eye and hold it captive. She understood Alexander's vanity and played to it masterfully. With her, he was not the weary husband weighed down by responsibility but the untouchable millionaire, powerful and admired. She stroked his pride with every glance, every compliment, making him believe he deserved more than the simple devotion Isabella offered at home. Her charm wasn't born of love but of manipulation. She knew how to dangle admiration like a lure, keeping Alexander intoxicated with her attention. Lavish gifts flowed freely between them. Diamonds sparkled against her wrists, designer gowns filled her closet, and secret trips to exotic places kept their affair alive. Each extravagant gesture was a symbol of Alexander's arrogance, his belief that money could buy silence and loyalty. He treated their affair not as a risk but as a reward he was entitled to, convinced that his wealth and cunning made him untouchable. In his arrogance, Alexander believed Isabella would never suspect. He saw her innocence and quiet devotion as weakness, mistaking her love for blindness. Even when he returned home late at night, the faint trace of perfume lingering on his suit, he dismissed the possibility of consequences. To him, Isabella was too fragile, too dependent, too trusting to ever confront him. What Alexander failed to recognize was that his double life was a ticking clock. Every secret rendezvous, every careless word, and every boastful smirk pulled him closer to the moment his world of lies would collide with the one Isabella was trying so desperately to hold together. He was too blinded by pride to see that the walls around him were already beginning to crack. It began with small things, the kind of changes Isabella tried to explain away at first. Alexander's late nights became more frequent, his excuses rehearsed and shallow, meetings that ran longer than expected, clients who demanded his time, business trips announced at the last minute. He no longer kissed her forehead before leaving in the mornings, nor did he ask about the baby's progress when he returned. The warmth that once made her believe in their marriage had cooled into a sharp, icy distance. At dinner, Isabella would wait at the table, her hands folded neatly, only to receive a hurried message that he wouldn't be coming home. Sometimes he returned smelling faintly of perfume she didn't wear, the collar of his shirt carrying traces that didn't belong to her. She noticed the new tie, the watch, the gifts she had not given him, and though the evidence whispered the truth, she clung to silence. She told herself stress explained his behavior, that the arrival of their child would remind him of what truly mattered. Still, the silence between them grew heavier. Nights became lonelier, the sound of the clock ticking in the empty bedroom her only companion. Isabella would lie awake with her hand pressed protectively over her stomach, whispering to her unborn child the words of love she wished her husband would say. Tears came quietly, never allowed to fall in his presence, because she feared confrontation might harm her baby more than the ache in her chest already did. She wore her pain like a secret, painting smiles for the outside world, pretending everything was perfect. But inside, she felt the storm gathering, the sense that her dreams of family were slipping through her fingers. She carried not just the weight of her unborn child but also the crushing burden of unspoken sorrow. Though she tried to silence her doubts, her heart could no longer ignore the truth. Something was terribly wrong, and the fragile life she was nurturing might already be caught in the shadow of betrayal. The night was heavy with unease, though Isabella could not explain why. Something inside her stirred restlessly, an intuition she had tried to suppress for weeks but could no longer silence. Alexander had told her he was leaving for yet another late meeting, his tone dismissive, his eyes avoiding hers. He left in a tailored suit, sharper than usual, a faint smile flickering across his lips as though he were looking forward to the evening. That smile haunted her. Against every instinct to stay home and protect her fragile peace, Isabella found herself reaching for her coat, her heart thudding with dread as she slipped into the quiet night. Her driver hesitated when she asked him to follow Alexander's car, but one look at her pale face and determined eyes silenced any protest. They trailed at a careful distance, the city lights blurring through her tears as her mind wrestled with the possibilities she prayed were untrue. The car finally stopped in front of an elegant restaurant, one Alexander had once promised to take her to but never did. Isabella's breath caught as she saw him step out, his posture relaxed, his expression alive in a way she hadn't seen in months. A moment later, a woman appeared at his side. Beautiful, striking, dressed in a gown that shimmered under the street lamps. She slipped her hand into Alexander's as if it belonged there. Isabella's world tilted. She sat frozen in the car, her hand pressed against the window, her vision blurring as though her body refused to process what her eyes revealed. Yet something inside her, desperate for confirmation, pushed her to step out, to see the truth up close. Each step toward the glowing windows of the restaurant felt like walking through fire. Her legs trembled, her breath came in shallow gasps, but she pressed forward until she could see them clearly through the glass. Alexander leaned across the table, laughing softly, his hand covering the mistress's as though he were promising her forever. The sight pierced Isabella's soul. Her heart pounded violently, her chest tightening until every breath was agony. She wanted to scream, to confront, to tear away the lies that had suffocated her marriage, but her body betrayed her. A sharp pain spread across her abdomen, searing and unbearable. Her vision swam with dark spots, her hands trembling uncontrollably as she pressed them against her stomach, terrified for the life within her. Her knees buckled, the ground rushing up to meet her as a cry escaped her lips. The restaurant doors burst open at the sound, but Isabella heard nothing clearly. Only the dull roar of her heartbeat and the echo of Alexander's laughter still ringing in her ears. Her body crumpled on the cold pavement, her strength shattered under the weight of betrayal. The last thought she clung to before darkness swallowed her was not of Alexander, not of the woman inside, but of her child. Fear gripped her as she prayed desperately that her collapse had not taken the innocent life she carried. The flashing red and blue lights of the ambulance painted the night as Isabella was rushed into the hospital, her body limp, her face pale as porcelain. Nurses and doctors moved quickly, wheeling her into the emergency ward, their voices urgent, calling out medical terms that blurred together. Her pulse was weak, her breathing shallow, and every second felt like a battle between life and death. The monitors beeped steadily, fragile reminders that both mother and child were still fighting. Alexander arrived moments later, his expression a mask of annoyance rather than panic. Instead of rushing to her bedside, his first words were directed at the staff. "Make sure no press gets wind of this." His tone was sharp, his eyes scanning the room not for Isabella's safety but for potential witnesses who might carry the story beyond these hospital walls. To him, her collapse was not a tragedy, it was a threat, a scandal that could tarnish his polished image of control and success. His presence was more a storm of irritation than of comfort, and even in her unconscious state, Isabella seemed to flinch at the coldness in his voice. In the hallway, the mistress lingered in the shadows, her nerves fraying with each passing minute. She had followed at a distance, not out of love but out of fear that the affair would be exposed in the chaos. Her beauty seemed to falter under the harsh hospital lights, her confidence replaced by anxious glances and restless pacing. She dreaded the thought of Alexander's powerful in-laws discovering her existence, for she knew her place in his world was as fragile as the lies that kept them together. Inside the ward, doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize Isabella. An oxygen mask covered her face as they checked the baby's heartbeat, the rhythmic sound on the monitor offering a sliver of hope. Every few minutes, a nurse emerged to update Alexander, but he barely listened, scrolling through his phone, calculating damage control, muttering under his breath about cancelled meetings and headlines to avoid. Not once did he ask if Isabella had opened her eyes, if she had spoken, or if she was in pain. The contrast was stark. Isabella's body lay fighting for two lives, while the man who had vowed to protect her treated her suffering as an inconvenience. In the sterile silence of the hospital, it became clear that the collapse had not only broken her body but had also shattered any illusion that Alexander's love had ever truly existed. The heavy doors of the hospital swung open, and with them entered a presence that commanded the entire corridor. Isabella's father strode in, his tailored suit immaculate, his expression carved from stone. He was no ordinary man, he was a billionaire doctor whose name carried weight in both medical circles and business empires. The staff straightened the moment they saw him, whispers rippling through the hallway. His reputation preceded him, a man of precision, intellect, and unshakable authority. But beneath his polished exterior, tonight he was only a father, one whose heart thundered with fear and rage. When he reached Isabella's room, his eyes softened for the briefest moment. His daughter lay pale and still, her fragile form connected to monitors that kept her tethered to life. The sight pierced him deeper than any scalpel ever could. He stepped closer, brushing a hand across her forehead, remembering her as the bright-eyed little girl who once ran into his arms with boundless trust. Now she looked broken, betrayed, and unbearably fragile. His chest tightened as the steady beep of the monitor reminded him how close he had come to losing her, and his unborn grandchild. Alexander stood nearby, shifting uncomfortably under the weight of his father-in-law's gaze. He offered no words of comfort, only excuses. She overreacted. She's too emotional these days. The doctors say she'll be fine. His tone was dismissive, laced with irritation rather than concern. The father's eyes narrowed, and though his voice remained calm, the fury beneath it was unmistakable. Do you think I don't see what's happening here? Do you believe your lies can hide what you've done to her? His words cut like steel, his authority pressing down on Alexander with suffocating force. Rage burned within him, though he did not raise his voice. It was the quiet fury of a man who had built empires, fought battles, and destroyed rivals without breaking a sweat. But this was different, this was personal. His daughter's suffering was not an inconvenience to be brushed aside. It was an unforgivable sin. He knew in that moment that Alexander's betrayal had gone beyond infidelity. It had endangered the very lives of his daughter and grandchild. He stood at Isabella's bedside, his hand resting protectively over hers, and made a silent vow. Whatever storm was required, whatever power he needed to unleash, he would strike back. Alexander had made the mistake of believing Isabella was alone. Now he would learn the truth. She had a father who would burn down kingdoms to protect her. The tension in the hospital room thickened until it was almost suffocating. Alexander tried to maintain his usual composure, straightening his shoulders, adjusting his cufflinks as if appearances could shield him from the storm standing before him. But Isabella's father was not a man easily cowed. His presence filled the space like thunderclouds gathering over a fragile landscape, and Alexander's carefully built arrogance began to crumble. "You've disgraced her," the father said, his voice steady, low, and dangerously controlled. Each word struck harder than a raised fist. "You let your pride, your selfishness, and your filth endanger my daughter and my grandchild. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done?" Alexander scoffed, though his confidence faltered beneath the weight of the older man's gaze. "You're overreacting. She's emotional. Pregnant women are always dramatic. This isn't as serious as you're making it." His words sounded rehearsed, brittle, the excuses of a man scrambling to regain ground. The father took a single step closer, his eyes sharp enough to cut through every layer of Alexander's facade. "I built an empire with these hands, and I know the smell of weakness when it stands before me. You mistake cruelty for strength, arrogance for power. But you will learn, today, that you are neither strong nor powerful compared to me." Alexander's lips pressed into a thin line, his jaw tight. "You don't control my marriage. Isabella is my wife." That was the breaking point. The father leaned forward, his tone calm but resonating like iron against stone. "No, Alexander. She is my daughter. And from this moment on, she will never shed another tear because of you. Whatever influence, whatever resources I must use, I will strip away every illusion you've built until nothing remains but the truth of what you are. A coward who destroys the very things meant to give him purpose." Alexander opened his mouth to retort, but the words died on his tongue. Standing against the raw conviction of the man before him, he seemed smaller, weaker, exposed. His arrogance was a mask that no longer fit, slipping away under the weight of a father's fury. For the first time, Alexander felt the unsettling truth. He was no longer in control of the game. In the days that followed, Isabella's father wasted no time. With quiet efficiency, he unleashed his influence and resources, summoning investigators, auditors, and legal experts to peel back the glittering facade Alexander had built around himself. What emerged was not the empire of a self-made millionaire, but a crumbling tower of lies. Fraudulent deals, forged signatures, and debts buried under layers of false accounts came to light. The wealth Alexander flaunted so proudly was not built on brilliance, but on deception and exploitation. When the evidence was laid before Isabella, her heart sank deeper than she thought possible. For years she had believed in him, supported him, sacrificed her own needs for the sake of his ambitions. To discover that his fortune was not only tainted by betrayal, but also by dishonesty made her feel as though every moment of their marriage had been nothing more than a carefully staged performance. The man she thought she knew had never truly existed. The mistress, too, was shaken as the truth unraveled. She had believed Alexander's promises, that he would leave his wife, that he would give her a future drenched in luxury, that she was the woman who made him feel alive. But now she saw herself clearly, a pawn in his game, discarded the moment she became inconvenient. The lavish gifts, the whispered vows, the attention that had made her feel powerful, all of it had been part of the same lies that ensnared Isabella. Shockwaves spread beyond the hospital walls. Business partners withdrew, investors vanished, and the name Alexander once wore like a crown began to rot in the public eye. For Isabella, the betrayal was no longer just personal. It was a revelation that the life she had devoted herself to was built on hollow promises and dangerous deceit. Yet, standing at her side, her father's presence was unshakable, reminding her that though the world she had known was collapsing, she was not alone in facing the wreckage. The mistress's confidence shattered as swiftly as Alexander's empire. Once she had basked in the glow of his attention, reveling in the diamonds and whispered promises, but now those gifts felt like shackles binding her to a sinking ship. The revelations of his fraud, his debts, and his indifference to Isabella's suffering forced her to confront a truth she could no longer ignore. She had been complicit in his lies. The guilt gnawed at her, sharp and unrelenting, and for the first time she questioned the price of the life she had chased. Fear tightened its grip around her as whispers of investigations spread. Reporters lurked, creditors demanded answers, and Isabella's powerful father had begun to circle Alexander with the precision of a hawk. The mistress realized that standing by him meant ruin, and worse, exposure that could destroy her own future. She could not endure the thought of being dragged down alongside him, her name forever tied to his disgrace. So she broke. With trembling hands and tear-stained cheeks, she sought out Isabella's father. She confessed everything, every dinner, every gift, every lie Alexander had spun to keep her bound to him. Her testimony was damning, filled with details only an insider could know. She spoke not just from fear but from a hollow ache of regret, knowing she had played a role in nearly destroying another woman's life. For Isabella's father, her confession was the missing weapon. It gave him the leverage he needed to tighten the net around Alexander, to turn the man's arrogance into a noose. And for the mistress, it was both a betrayal and a liberation. By turning against him, she severed the last tie to a man who had deceived them both, leaving Alexander to face the storm alone. The storm that Alexander had long believed he was immune to finally broke, and it was relentless. The first blow came in the courts, where Isabella's father ensured every detail of Alexander's fraudulent dealings was laid bare. The mistress's testimony, paired with damning financial evidence, stripped away the carefully constructed image of success Alexander had paraded for years. Judges who once greeted him with deference now regarded him with contempt. His empire, built on lies and deceit, collapsed under the weight of truth, leaving him scrambling like a man drowning in a tide he could no longer control. The media seized on the scandal with voracious hunger. Headlines screamed of his infidelity, his corruption, and his betrayal of a pregnant wife who had nearly lost her life because of his arrogance. Paparazzi hounded him outside courthouses, flashing cameras catching every sneer, every stumble, every attempt at denial. The man who once reveled in attention now tried desperately to avoid it, but there was no escape. His name, once synonymous with wealth and power, had become a byword for disgrace. Business partners fled from him like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Contracts were torn apart, accounts frozen, and investors demanded repayment of debts he could not cover. Piece by piece, The empire he had so arrogantly believed untouchable was dismantled, leaving him with nothing but fragments of the power he had abused. His once loyal circle vanished, revealing how shallow his influence truly was when stripped of wealth. Behind it all was Isabella's father, moving with precision and patience. He did not simply want Alexander ruined, he wanted justice, and he wanted it complete. Legal action ensured his crimes could not be buried, while strategic leaks to the press guaranteed the public saw the truth of who Alexander really was. Every angle was covered, every avenue of escape blocked. It was not just revenge, it was a meticulous dismantling orchestrated by a man who refused to let his daughter's suffering go unanswered. In the end, Alexander was left standing in the ruins of the life he had once controlled so arrogantly. No empire, no respect, no mistress to stroke his pride. Just a hollow man, broken under the weight of his own choices, while the woman he betrayed was surrounded by love and protection. For Alexander, the fall was complete, and for Isabella's father, it was justice, swift, undeniable, and absolute. The days after Alexander's downfall were not easy for Isabella, but they were filled with a gentleness she had almost forgotten existed. Her body, still weary from the collapse, healed slowly under the attentive care of doctors her father personally selected. Each appointment, each reassuring word, reminded her that she was no longer alone in carrying the weight of her struggles. Surrounded by skilled hands and compassionate voices, she began to feel her strength return, bit by bit, like sunlight breaking through after a long storm. Emotionally, the scars cut deeper. The memories of betrayal lingered, sometimes striking her in the quiet hours of the night when she lay awake, hand resting protectively over her belly. But unlike before, she no longer suffered in silence. Therapy became her refuge, a place where she could release the pain she had bottled up for months, where her voice was not dismissed but honored. There, she learned that her worth was never tied to Alexander's approval, and that the love she had given so freely was not a weakness but a reflection of her strength. Her father's presence was constant, a steady wall of protection she leaned on whenever the memories threatened to overwhelm her. He accompanied her to sessions, walked with her in the gardens when she needed air, and reminded her daily that she was cherished beyond measure. The distance that had once existed between them was gone, replaced by a bond forged in pain but strengthened by love. Slowly, Isabella began to smile again. She realized that betrayal had not broken her spirit, it had revealed its resilience. The woman who had once lived quietly in the shadows of her husband's arrogance now stood taller, her hand on her heart, her eyes shining with the quiet courage of someone who had endured and survived. She was no longer just Alexander's wife or her father's daughter. She was Isabella, mother, survivor, and a woman who would never again be silenced by sorrow. The day finally came when Isabella's long journey of fear and heartbreak transformed into one of hope. After months of careful monitoring and healing, she was wheeled into the delivery room surrounded by the quiet hum of machines and the soft encouragement of doctors who knew her story well. Hours of pain and determination culminated in a cry that filled the air, a sound so pure, so life-affirming, that tears streamed down Isabella's cheeks the moment she heard it. Her child had arrived safely, tiny and perfect, a living symbol of resilience born from the darkest of trials. When the baby was placed in her arms, Isabella felt a rush of warmth unlike anything she had ever known. The child's little fingers curled instinctively around hers, and in that simple touch, she found healing. All the pain, the betrayal, the lonely nights filled with tears, none of it defined her anymore. She had survived, and she had brought life into the world. Holding her baby close, she whispered promises of love, safety, and a future free from the shadows that had once surrounded her. Her father stood by her bedside, his eyes uncharacteristically wet, his usually stern expression softened with pride. For him, this moment was not just about the birth of his grandchild, it was proof that his daughter had endured and emerged stronger. He placed a gentle hand on Isabella's shoulder, silently vowing once again that no harm would ever touch her or her child as long as he lived. Together, they looked at the newborn, a bond of 3 generations bound by strength, sacrifice, and unyielding love. As the days passed, Isabella embraced single motherhood with grace. There were challenges ahead, but she met them with the quiet courage she had gained through her suffering. Her scars, once symbols of sorrow, now became marks of survival, reminders of the battles she had fought and the strength she had discovered within herself. No longer did she see herself as broken. She saw herself as whole, rebuilt with resilience and love. With her child in her arms and her father by her side, Isabella stepped into her new beginning, not as a victim of betrayal, but as a mother whose strength would define the future. Alexander's name, once spoken in circles of wealth and admiration, gradually slipped into silence. The media that once praised his empire now spoke of him only as a warning, an arrogant millionaire who lost everything because of his greed and cruelty. His lavish mansions were sold, his reputation destroyed, and his so-called friends abandoned him. Alone and forgotten, he became a shadow of the man he once pretended to be, a living reminder of how arrogance and betrayal always carve their own downfall. He faded not with a bang, but with a whimper, swallowed by the obscurity he had always feared. Meanwhile, Isabella's story took a far different path. No longer defined by the pain of her marriage, she stepped into the light as a symbol of quiet resilience. Her devotion as a mother, her courage to endure betrayal, and her strength to rise from the ashes won the admiration of those around her. She was no longer the fragile wife hidden behind a husband's shadow. She became the woman who carried herself with grace, her scars serving as proof of survival, not defeat. Her child grew in an environment filled with warmth and love, nurtured by the protective presence of a grandfather whose devotion knew no limits. Her father's strike back had been more than revenge. He had not simply destroyed Alexander, he had restored his daughter's dignity, safeguarded his grandchild's future, and reaffirmed the power of love over cruelty. In standing against Alexander, he had stood for every woman silenced by betrayal, every daughter who had once felt unseen, and every legacy threatened by corruption. His triumph was not one of destruction alone, but of rebuilding, a restoration of faith, family, and justice. Together, Isabella and her father stood as living proof that betrayal, no matter how deep, could not crush the bonds of true love and loyalty. Where Alexander's name was whispered as a cautionary tale, theirs were spoken with admiration. Their story became a legacy of survival, of justice reclaimed, and of a family's unbreakable bond. And in that legacy, the true strike back was revealed, not revenge, but the triumph of love, dignity, and strength that would live on for generations to come.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.